Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you've already watched the assembly portion of this video series, unless you didn't need to or didn't want to or whatever. Anyway, we're gonna jump right into it. As I mentioned in the other video, I've left off a few pieces from the model. This is, of course, the Dragon King from Kingdom Death Monster. I've left the wings off, and I've left the rib cage pieces off. The wings for convenience, and the rib cage because if I put them in, I can't really paint the chest area thing, heart, ball, whatever. I'm going to be priming this with my airbrush using Badger's Stynylrez primer. The Stynylrez primer is pretty much my favorite primer for all things plastic. It is not what I use for metal. I don't think it works very good for metal. But for plastic, it's great. I'm going to be using both black and white. Black for overall, and then the white for the chest area, because that's going to be very bright. But we're going to start with the black, and I'm going to be using my Iwata Eclipse, which is my go-to workhorse airbrush. I haven't masked this off, but I'd really like to avoid getting paint in there, so just so that it glues well. I mean, I can go back in and scrape that out if need be. Same thing with the connection points for the wings. Want to avoid getting paint on them, but if paint gets on them, it's no big deal. A quick pass with sandpaper will make it ready for gluing. Of course, the easiest way to avoid it is to just not spray towards it, because sometimes you can't avoid it. All right, with the primer on, I'm going to take this opportunity to look over the whole model and see if there's anything that needs to be cleaned up or sanded. I think overall I did a pretty good job with all of the seams. The only thing that's bothering me right now is this little line right here. It's not bad, but I think what I'm going to do is, like right here is worse than it is across here. This is really a terrible place to put a seam. But I'm gonna put some liquid green stuff over this area. I'm gonna let it dry. I'm gonna sand it down. And then resculpt in some of the lines that go across this way. You see, I'm avoiding the big lines across. I think down here on this lower level, I'm going to put a little bit on, but I'm going to make it thinner. Yeah, I'm having a hard time even finding the seam line here. So that's good. Yeah, it seems to be invisible over there, so really just right here. So I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to sand it. And we'll just make sure that everything else looks good. If you recall, if you watched the build-up video, I had filled a gap on this leg using the UV cured resin, and that gap is now gone. So worked as expected, which is nice. So I'm gonna let that dry. I'm gonna do some sanding, a little sculpting. Well, I'm gonna let it dry, then I'll come back. All right, while I'm waiting for the liquid green stuff to dry, which by the way, you can speed that along with a hairdryer, which I started to do, and then I realized I have a lot of things to do here, so I don't need to hurry on one drying process when I can just move to something else. So I'm gonna start on the wings. And I'm gonna do an undercoat, and this is really specifically for the webbing of the wing. And I'm gonna do Violet 4. This is Warcolors Violet 4. I was trying to decide if I wanted to go 5. 5 is super dark, and it's also very transparent, and so I thought it wasn't going to give me the effect that I wanted. But I actually want it to be a little darker than this, so what I'm going to do is go light. Since I'm using the airbrush, that's pretty easy to do. And so we're going to start by adding a little. This is Createx 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is Createx High Performance Reducer. And generally speaking, I use it roughly 1-to-1. But sometimes, well, and if I want it thinner, then I obviously just go more reducer than paint. 2, 3, 4. These drops are really big and thick, so I'm gonna not do an equal number. I'm gonna mix that up. And for those of you going, why are you doing the wings in purple? I'm not. This is just my starting color, and it's a color that I kind of want to come through in the recesses and in the shadow areas. I like using subtle purples with my monsters. It's just nice to have hints of it, especially when you're using green, because this is going to be a predominantly green dragon. So this is just it's going to be very subtle. And later, I might go back with that darker purple to do some shading with the airbrush. That's actually a very good shade color for the green that I'll be using. All right, I am going to go to my next step here, and that is to do the webbing part of the wings again, this time with my kind of core color. Now normally in the other green ones that I've done, and I think I've done 2 green and 2 blue, the other green ones I've done a darker version. No, actually no, I've done this color and then a lighter color. But this time I'm going to try and blend this color a little bit more with the color of the rest of the body. So I'm going to start with, well, I'm going to start with thinner, or reducer. Start with some reducer, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I swapped airbrushes, by the way. This is now my Iwata CMB, Custom Micron B. It gives me a lot more control. So since I'm working in a more finite space and trying to be more subtle, I want my more subtle airbrush. Alright, so let's say, and this is also going to be a thinner mix. Uh-oh. 2, 3, 4, 5, that's good. And let's say 2 drops of this, and I'm totally winging this. I have not done this before. You know what? Let's mix it with 1 drop and see how that looks. Oh, that's not bad. Yeah, 2 might go too far. Alright, we're going to go with that. This green will be the core body color. So that's why I wanted to include it in this. So it's going to be, the wings kind of go up like this. This is how they sit. So I always go from the sort of halo of light theory, which means that, you know, light's coming down from above. So if you're going to create shadows, well, they'd be on the underside. But also, when I'm thinking about how I'm going to airbrush, I sort of want to airbrush in the direction of the light when I'm doing my highlights. But I'm not going to do that, because if I was, so here's how it's actually going to sit. It's going to be just like that. So if I was going to go directly down from here, I could do that. But what I really want to do is just make sure that my paint is moving in this direction. There we go, okay. And that way I can get some natural highlights and shadows, just utilizing the texture of the wing itself. You don't want to go too heavy because, like, you know, these deeper recesses, there's a danger of your paint actually pooling up in there, and you don't want that to happen. So light coats. You know, and if you need to let one part dry, you just move to another section. Go a little lighter on the coat on the underside. Let more of that purple come through. Because this part of the wing is in shadow. I can't remember if I mentioned the colors that I was using here, and that was Olive 5 from Warcolors, and this is Brown 1 also from Warcolors. Brown 1 I use a lot. In fact, this bottle is almost empty, and I think I have more somewhere, which is good because I need it. The olive darkens the brown 1 very nicely and makes a really just nice shaded version of the brown. But now I'm just going to use the brown on its own. as a highlight color. And with luck, I can get a few more drops out of here. Okay, yeah. I'm going to be doing essentially the same thing that I did last time. But I'm going to be more focused on the highlights and not covering the whole thing. Like, I really wanted to pick up the details. This is like an airbrushing a dry brush. A very directional coat. Oh, that's coming out nice. Now I'm going to do it on the back side here a little bit too, but I'm really just going to concentrate on the upper portion of this because as you get deeper down, it's really just completely in shadow. So it would lose a lot of the contrast and the brightness. So you can even have the airbrush help you just sort of fade off. I mean, that's really what this is best at. Because the overspray is going to provide your fade. Awesome. All right, I'm going to do the other one. I'll be back. All right, I set aside the wings for the moment. I'm kind of happy with where they are right now, but I clearly am going to need to come back to them at some point. But I wanted to take another stab at the seam line. And if you didn't know it, the liquid green stuff is actually very sandable. I think a lot of people don't like it because they don't use it and they just equate it with the whole fine cast fiasco and ignore the fact that it's actually a pretty worthwhile product on its own. It has a very small use case because you can't use it to fix large problems. You can only use it to deal with little issues like this one. Any bigger gaps or seams, you're going to want to use something that has a little bit more bulk to it. But when you're, this is really for final. Let's look at it that way. It's for exactly what I'm using this for, which is like I already made one stab at filling the seam, and it got most of the way there, but it didn't get all of the way there. And you can use the liquid green stuff for that final cleanup. All right, so let me see. I got my little round file, which I can use to get these big lines back in. And I think what I'm going to do is just make sure that I get those lines back in, and then reprime it so I can really see what the surface looks like now. You know what, maybe I'll... Yeah, all right, so I'm gonna reprime that, take a look at it, see where we are. All right, be right back. Okay, I've got that neck area all taken care of. I want to move on to the chest because again, I can't fully assemble the chest pieces until that's done, and I want to be able to assemble this before I do the full body painting because it makes it easier to blend all the paint together. So we're going to take care of that now, and I'm sort of winging this part. I've done this, obviously, like I said, I've done this several times, but I've done it different ways, and I can't say that I've ever been 100% happy with my results. So this is just going to be yet another experiment. And I've already got that primed white, and I think I'm going to blow in some Watercolors One Coat Yellow. It's a very kind of lemony yellow, and this is really just going to be an undercoat. I want the whole thing to kind of have an orangey cast to it, orangey red, and this will make for a good base for that. I guess part of the problem I have doing this is, you know, I'm trying to kind of replicate the artwork, but the artwork doesn't really show this area. It really just it shows it at an angle, and you just kind of see an orangey glow coming from there. So my assumption is that the light is primarily coming from this stone right here, maybe from the face, but I think the stone would be the primary source of light. So that's going to be my brightest point, and then everything will go more reddish from there. But that's going to be my light source. So I gotta think of that as my light source. And I can't forget that I need to do the underside of these ribs too, because it's gonna get, the light is coming out from the chest. And although you won't see the majority of this area that I'm painting right here, you will see some of it. So I just gotta treat it as if you're gonna see it. Okay. The one coat colors dry really quickly, so once I get the airbrush cleaned up, I should be able to move right to my next color. Okay, first experiment. This is something I have not done before. I'm going to be using the Watercolors Red Glaze through the airbrush and really going over everything except for that stone in the middle. Or I'm expecting some overspray onto the stone, but I'm focusing on other things. My guess is that this will be super transparent, and it'll give me the opportunity to really have control over the color. I am thinning it. Their glaze is almost as thick as the rest of their paints. There's also still a little bit of yellow left in here, but not enough to really affect the paint much. Let's start with this. Oh yeah, that is very transparent. That's good. That's very good. You know what does that look like out here? Oh, that's pretty cool. All right. Kind of what I'd hoped. All right. So again, I'm gonna focus on most of the color on the outsides, and then slowly work my way in a little bit. And that should give a nice feel of that stone being the light source. Oh yeah, actually it looks better on camera. I'm hazing a little bit over the yellow just to better tie it all in. Oh, that is... I like it. I really like it. All right. And again, not really going to see this, but you will see the edges of it as it comes up along the chest area. And you know what? I'm going to have to go back over this later anyway, because when I paint this all green, I'm going to need to blend the two things together. But this, at least, I know that the areas that I won't be able to reach after I've glued these pieces in are painted. Excellent. I have yet to use the glaze, the Warcolors glaze, like a glaze. A couple of times that I've experimented with it, it's just been, it doesn't behave like a glaze, to me anyway. Haven't quite figured it out, but for a very transparent color, works great. Oh, that's wonderful. Great, 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 great. All right, be back in a minute. So there it is after assembly, and again, I think it looks great. There is an issue that I'm going to have to deal with, and I'm going to do it off camera because this is a painting video and not a building video, and if you want to see how I do this kind of stuff, you can look at the other video, but there is a fairly serious gap running down here and another one over here, and I'm gonna have to wait for the glue to dry before I deal with it. But anyway, I gotta seal that whole thing up so that it looks nice, and I'm not gonna do that on camera, so I think I'm gonna move on to something else before I get to that, and I'll just sort of work on this during one of the camera breaks. You know what we can do right now is we can get back to the wings, and what I can do is start the base coat on the fingers. And as I mentioned before, the Olive 5 from Watercolors is going to be my main color. 8. All right. And again, going to be using the Iwata CMB because I want to be able to freehand this. I don't want to have to mask anything off. And I'm going to do some of this on camera, and then I'm going to take it off camera and finish it because I have to work fairly close. There we go. All right. And it's always possible that I'm either going to pull the work out from where you can see it, excellent. Yeah, when doing something like this, I mean, aside from having an airbrush that can get in really tight, I mean, I could probably do this with my other airbrush as well. It's just easier to do it with this one. But just always keep track of where your overspray is going. Because right now, if I'm doing the inside of this, I'm pointing the airbrush this way, because that way, as long as I don't pull down too much, all the overspray is going away from the areas of the model that I don't want to get paint on it. If I had it this way and I was trying to do it like this, all that green overspray is going to get on the fleshy bits over here, and I don't want that to happen. So yeah, you just keep track of where you're pointed and where your overspray is going, and then you can freehand this stuff. And a little bit, the next off into the way is perfectly fine, because that's just essentially where those colors went in. But just want to keep them on. With that, don't say much. Okay, I'm going to do the rest of this off camera. I'll be back in a bit. So real quickly here, I realized that I missed something in my discussion of overspray. Some of you might have been wondering, well, hey, that works fine for the outer fingers, but what about the inner ones? Well, that's when you dial back the air pressure a little bit, hold your breath, and very carefully go in directly. There's just no way around it. You know, sometimes you just have to be super careful, and that is one of those times. But as you can see, it's been working fine. And again, I could probably do this with my other airbrush, but it becomes much easier when you have an airbrush with a super fine tip. So, yeah. Anyway, I gotta get back to it. This worked out really well. So next is highlight color, and I'm just using Olive 4 from Watercolors. It's just a little bit lighter version. And again, I'm going to get started on camera and finish up off camera. Obviously, in this case, I have to be a lot more careful. Now then, brush it. All right, yeah, I'm gonna finish this up off camera, and then I think I'm gonna go for a little bit lighter color, like on the tips, and maybe where the joints are. But I'll come back and we'll do that. You'll get to see some of that. Maybe all of that, because that might be a little bit easier to do on camera. Okay, be back. I decided to go in a little bit different direction. So this is Olive 4, which was the last color I used. This is Olive 3, which is quite a drastic jump. But I thought as a highlight color, it might work reasonably well, and if I controlled it, it didn't have to be overwhelming, which is really one of the reasons I didn't immediately think of using it. But it will, my initial idea was to just lighten Olive 4 with white or a gray. But Olive 3 will actually put a little bit more, I don't know, spark into it. But again, I'm gonna want to be kind of ginger with it. So this will give that green a little bit more richness, but I don't want it to turn into, you know, yellow-green, which is really what it is. So I'm just going to be really careful with it. Focus on these tips, blend it out a little, add some at the joints. I'm not going to put any on the underside. Well, okay, I'm going to put a little bit on the underside. Of course, this also means that this is going to get used on the rest of the model as well, and I'm okay with that. This will make this unique from the other ones that I've done. And I kind of like that too. Normally, you know, when I do the Kingdom Death models, I like to work from the artwork, and I generally don't go and look at the models that I've done before. So usually each time that I'm working on one of these models, it's an interpretation of the artwork, and not necessarily a duplication of what I've done in the past. So there's going to be a lot of similarities, but differences as well, because, you know, every now and then I see something I didn't necessarily see the first time when I was looking at the art, and I try to incorporate that into the model that I'm doing right then. And so that means that the piece that I'm doing is going to be unique for that customer, which I think is nice. Of course, every now and then you get something, it's like, well, I kind of liked how this worked out last time, and I don't see any differences, and so it's going to be kind of the same. So it's not always different, but I do it when I can, or when it makes sense. All right, I'm gonna go do the other one, I'm going to double check this to make sure I got as much on there as I want. Then I think I'm going to add the red in. There's some red shading that goes on the edges of the wings, and I think we can work on that next. Be right back. All right, let's do the red. And I went back to the red glaze from Watercolors. I was so happy with how it turned out on the chest that I decided I was gonna see how it fared here. And again, I'm gonna be very directional. I want it to fade off in that direction. And I want the color strongest at the top, so. I'm keeping myself focused on the edge. And because this is a very transparent color, it's going to really fade off nicely, and it'll give me a nice blend. That's very sweet. All right. Yep, already did the other one. I like it. I like it a lot. As it dries, the color is getting a little dark. Ooh, let's go back to this one. That's not surprising. I mean, it's a transparent color, so since I'm not working over white, I'd have to build it up in several successive layers to get the full intensity of the color. But that's okay. It doesn't need to be super bright. Okay, I'm gonna let that go. I think at this point might be best to, well, touch up this primer and then base coat the dragon. Oh, I still haven't done that. Okay, I'm gonna go fix that, and then we'll come back and we'll base coat the dragon. All right, so I got the whole thing base coated with Olive 5. I've now loaded up with some Olive 4. And I'm gonna start my first highlight, really a broad highlight. I'm just gonna avoid the deepest recesses. Make sure that I accentuate the high points. Otherwise, it's mostly going over the places where, well, essentially it's going almost everywhere. But again, I can, unlike with the base coat, I can be more directional with this, essentially going top down. But I still want to avoid things like getting into those recessed areas there. Again, you can kind of think of it how you might approach a dry brush. Sort of. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's not a bad one either. Just always be aware of, you know, where the top is and spray from that direction. You might as well have the detail working for you. So I keep checking periodically just to make sure that I know which way is up. All right, I'm gonna have to get in a little closer, so I'll be back in a minute. All right, it's coming along. And I think I'm gonna go for the olive 3 again as a highlight. We'll see how it goes. Not 100% convinced on this, but I have a thought that when I come back a little later with the purple shading, I think it's going to tie it all together really nicely. So we'll just have to see how that goes. I made this fairly thin. I don't want the yellow to push through too hard. And I'm probably not going to do too much of this on camera because this is going to take some fine control. But I am already liking where that's going, so. But this is going to be for the highest highlights. To really define the shape of everything. But like I said, I will be going back over and push the shadows back down again using some dark purple. It looks a lot stronger on camera than it does in person. But then, you know, so did the chest, so. Okay, I gotta get in close, so I'll see you in a minute. All right, I like how this is coming along, but we're not there yet. I think I'm going to want to do the underside of the throat here. I've normally done this lighter color, and I think I'm going to do that again this time. I'm going to use Warm Gray 2, but I'm going to do it very thin. So again, I don't want this to be the final color. I really just want to use it to lighten this up. It's also going to sort of desaturate it. I'm trying to decide if I want to do it on the tail as well, in this underside here. I don't think I've ever done that before, and I don't think I'm going to do it this time either. So yeah, just the underside of here. Again, want to be really careful. I don't want to get this up into the other part of the neck. I'm trying to treat each segment between those little sculpted lines as almost like a panel on a spaceship or a tank. So this side's pretty heavily in shadow, so I'm not going to do it as much. This side should be brighter. Every now and then I'm like, I don't see anything happening here, and that's because the tip's been clogged. You know, as long as I got this color here, might as well get started on the teeth, because this will be the color that I use. And this way, I'm sort of ahead of the game. Fantastic. All right, I'm gonna just do a couple more passes on there to make sure I've got it where I want it. And then I think I'm gonna come back with some purple and start doing some shading. And then we might do another highlight pass after we get through with those shadows. So I'll be back in a sec. All right, so I've got Violet 5, Watercolors Violet 5. Again, this is a dark, transparent purple color. And I'm just going to be dropping this right into all of the deep shadow areas. I really like the way purple and green interact. I don't want this to be overt. This should just deepen the shadows, provide a little richness to the color. But because it's super transparent, I can really control it. Like really, initially when you put it on, you can just see the color get darker and you don't really see, you don't see the purple at all. It's kind of cool. Seems good? Yeah. Okay, I'll be back in a minute. So after finishing the purple, I picked up the highlight color again, Olive 3, and kind of went back over it again. Really, because, you know, I was bringing it down, I wanted to bring it back up. I'm really kind of happy with the state of it currently. And so I'm going to move on to something else. And my thinking is that, you know, once it gets closer to completion, I'll kind of have a better look at the whole thing and whether or not I want to go back in and tweak anything anymore. But for right now, I'm going to work on the teeth since I got started on those. The next step here, because again, just a reminder, Warm Gray 2 from Watercolors was what I put on the teeth there. I'm going to wash them with Seraphim Sepia. This is my normal bone and teeth color combination, at least to start with. If I want the teeth to be really bright, I will go back over them with the Warm Gray 2 after the wash, and then do the Warm Gray 1, and then they will look like he brushes regularly. I'm going to see what they look like after I wash these, and I'm probably just going to go back in with the Warm Gray 2 to provide some more definition, and I may not take it all the way to 1. I kind of like the yellowiness of them. It's kind of creepy. So I'm gonna let that go. And I think the next step too, I need to work on these horns. And I haven't entirely decided on a base color. I think, because in the artwork, let's see if I have the artwork handy. Yeah, in the artwork, well, they sort of look like green and then the red interior, and I don't want to go with the green again. So I think what I'm going to do is go with more of a brown, and I can use Warm Gray 3, which is just a gray, but it's almost a stony gray, and then I'll wash it with Agrax Earthshade and see where that takes us. The final color, I mean, there's going to be more red in there, so the horn color itself is almost incidental because of the other brighter color that will be on top of it. So I think we don't need to worry about it too much. This could easily be blocked in with a brush, but I have an airbrush, so why would I want to do that? The old mixing brush. This is another situation where I want to be really careful not to get overspray on my already painted areas. So you can see where getting down in there is a little problematic. So what I'm going to do is just carefully work my way in that direction and keep an eye on the edge. And actually, I can let that fade into the darkness there. That is a perfectly good place for a shadow. So I don't need to push the paint all the way into there. Alright, I gotta let that dry. Then I'll wash some Agrax Earthshade into there. I got my mixing brush. It's a good, nice, large brush for doing this area. So what I don't want to have happen is this drippiness. So when I see that happening, I'm going to blend it out. A little bit of pooling is okay. It provides some, like, see how this is all building up on the edge there? That's kind of nice. I like that. But when it looks like drips, that's a good time to spread it out. This all looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. All right, just need to let that dry. The teeth are all dry. That's going to need a little application of warm gray too. Maybe I could just do that right now. Make sure I thin it just a bit. This is going to take a couple of thin coats to get it where I want it. I definitely want to leave a lot of the yellow color in the upper recesses or lower recesses if I'm doing the lower teeth. Look at that smile. That's amazing. I'm going to go back over the horn with Warm Gray 2 with the airbrush to brighten it back up again. I'm not going to go real heavy on it. This is just a highlight. And it makes it easier for the red that's going to come. To really show, because if I try to put it over this brown, it'll be really dull. So I'm gonna get the rest of this off camera. Be back in a moment. All right, I'm gonna do the red glow off of the horns. I don't know what that represents, but it's there in the art, so I'm gonna do it. And to get started, I'm actually gonna undercoat with white. I'm gonna do a little pattern up each of the up each of the horns, and then I'm going to go over that with the red glaze that has been doing so well for us. And what that'll do is that pattern will appear as a bright red. Damn it. And then that'll fade into the rest of the horn, which will be darker. There we go. Okay. Not much better. Alrighty, that looks good. Alright, here we go. What's off is a lot more than I expected. Like, there's almost no red aside from where the white was, so I'll build that a little bit more. At least I'm not worried about the inside. Alright, I might actually add a little yellow down here. Well, we'll come back to that, let that dry. So I've been noodling around with a few little details, like the eyes. And I put some warm gray 2 on the rib cage and on the claws. And I'm just letting those dry. And right now, actually, what I'm thinking about is the runes on his body. And I've done these before. And generally speaking, it's mostly like a freehand thing. But what I think I'm going to do is kind of sketch these out with white paint and then airbrush over them with the golden yellow, and sort of like with the horns, it will bring out the rune will be very distinct because of the white, but then there should be some nice fading off because of the airbrushing, and not too much because yellow is generally really very transparent. I'm also gonna be there's all these little like pimples, and I think I'm gonna pull those out with olive 3, or maybe even olive 2, which is even more yellow than this. But we'll see what the 3 looks like, and if I think they need to be a little brighter, then I'll do the 2. I have not put any yellow in there yet. I'm still thinking about it. I actually think I'm going to go another coat of red on there as well. But I think in order to do the runes, I need to do those by hand. I need to do it close up. Can't really do it on camera. And it's not something I'm particularly good at, so it takes a lot of effort. Oh damn. I keep getting light colored paint flicking out of the, well, I'll have to paint that back in. It's when I'm mixing up the paint, it's splashing. Oh, there it goes. Oh, gone. Perfect. Okay. And a little more. That's annoying. Oh, where's my shaper? Maybe that'll do it. There we go. It's almost like an eraser. This is like a little silicone brush. I sometimes use it for sculpting. Okay, good. Good, that's got that taken care of. So yeah, I'm gonna go in and hand paint those runes on there. When I'm ready to do the airbrushing, I'll come back, and that way you'll be able to see them before I get to that stage. Be back. There's my symbols. I think they turned out okay. They were a little bit of work. They weren't too bad though. I'm gonna use Vallejo Game Air Gold Yellow, because this is kind of exactly what I was looking for. I was almost going to use Watercolors Yellow 5, but then I remembered I had this, and that was closer to my ideal. I'm still going to thin this, even though it's airbrush paint. I'm going to do about 50-50. Oh yeah, that's perfect. So I'm going over it multiple times so I can make sure I get a little bit of a yellow glow around the symbol. All right. Oh yeah, that's looking really good. All right, I'm gonna let that dry, but I also think I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna do a Seraphim Sepia wash on the ribs, and then Agrax Earthshade wash on the claws, and then I'll come back. I actually took a break because it was nighttime and time to go to sleep. So this is the next morning, which is why the lighting is a little weird right now. I've got sun coming in from the window over there, and it won't be there for very long. It's just, there's this little sliver of time when the sun just comes straight through the window. At that point, it'll be gone in a little while, and I didn't want to wait, so we're gonna get going, and we're gonna talk a little bit about the last things I did last night before I stopped. And so I added that yellow I mentioned. It's really the same yellow from the runes. I did all the little pimples in the Olive 3, as I mentioned I was going to. I noticed that I forgot some runes on the arms, so I'm going to get to those first thing today. You also might notice that the wings are now attached. That was the last thing I did before I wrapped it up for the night. I just felt like it was a good time. It wasn't necessarily the ideal time, because and speaking of not ideal time, I got to work on the and you can't really, and this is part of the problem here, I got to work on the claws, the foot claws and stuff, and that is essentially multiple passes of Agrax Earthshade over Wurmgrey 2, which gives it a really dirty bone look. And I'm probably going to go back over that a little bit today with some of the Wurmgrey to just sort of bring the highlight back out. I'm going to dot the eye with some yellow. And I think in this case, I'm just going to use the yellow 5. It's going to be fairly transparent. And so it's not going to be a very, you probably won't see like a real dot there. It'll be more subtle of a highlight. It'll make the eyes go a little bit more orange, which is cool. I need to clean up the edges where the wings attach. I knew I was going to need to do that when I got around to doing it. There's not a lot of work, but it's going to be a little bit. There's going to be a little sanding, some primer, and then paint, essentially to blend all the edges together. And at that point, we're going to be nearly done. So I think, but what we're going to do first thing, I'm going to put those runes on, and I think I got to take a look. I think it is just like a handful of wavy lines. I don't know why that doesn't want to. There we go. There we go. So like five wavy lines. Kind of canted at an angle downwards from the outside to in. And I'm going to approach that in pretty much precisely the way that I did it yesterday. Let's see if I can get this on camera a little. Oh, I need my magnifier. All right. So, let me see. That's too thin. Why is this so thin? I don't think I thinned it. I think the wet palette has leached a lot of water into the paint. That's okay. This only needs to get me started. Yeah, and one nice thing about the Warcolors paints that I've discovered is that they are really easy to remove if you have a problem. If you get to them fairly quickly, I mean, even if they've been sitting for a few minutes and are essentially dry, you can work them with a brush. I think you saw me do that yesterday. What did I do that with? Oh, I was taking off, yeah, I'd actually accidentally splashed a little paint on. And I don't even know how long that had been sitting before I was able to clean it off. But you essentially have a little while. This is not full strength. I think I'm just gonna do this one last line. And I'm gonna do the rest of this off camera so I can see what I'm doing and I don't screw it up. But I'm also gonna go back over them a second time to bring it out a little stronger. So anyway, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna clean up all this white that I got on right here after talking about how easy it is to clean this stuff off. It's gonna be that kind of day. See that? Look at that. Again, I'm using my silicone shaper brush. Anyway, I'm gonna go do that for real off camera. Okay, be back in a bit. See that? The sunlight is already gone. Well, not completely, but that big streaming bit of sunlight. I always find this interesting to see really just how transparent these yellows are. I had gone ahead and cleaned up the hands. And finished up these lines. I added the dots to the eyes. I really like how it makes them pop a bit more. Been thinking about what other steps I need to do to finish this up. I'm going to add some red to the ribs. In previous ones, I've mostly sort of enveloped that whole area in the glow. So I do think I'm going to add some more red to the outside of the chest. But I don't think I'm going to completely... I think I'm going to go light on the red on the ribs. Well, we'll see. You know, it's going to be one of those, I'll figure it out as I'm going along and seeing what looks right. And a lot of times that's what I do while I'm painting. I was actually very happy to get the wings on. I was feeling like there was just way too much green when I was looking at the model without the wings. But then once I got the wings on, I was like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, that's all balanced out really well now. So I no longer have that feeling. So cool. He's looking all tatted up now. Yeah, so I think I'm gonna clean the airbrush and jump onto that red. So I'll be back in a minute. Ugh, I keep finding places where I've slopped the brush over the model somewhere. So I've been doing little bits of cleanup here and there. I thought I'd go ahead and use that red glaze again. In retrospect, this would have probably been a good thing to do while the ribs were off. But you know, sometimes you don't think of those things in the moment. And there we have it. She appears to be done. you know, barring any last minute oopsies or what have you that I might discover. One of the things I did that really helped sort of complete it for me was my clear coat, which was a matte coat. And my go-to for that is Liquitex Matte Varnish. Sprays from the airbrush just fine. I do thin it, just like any of my other paints, about 50-50. You can actually use this with a brush, and it works pretty well. I don't do that, especially not on something this large. I might use it with a brush on small parts that I'm trying to do separate from other parts, but mostly I don't. This isn't the matte coat that I will normally use. This is a pretty dead flat matte coat, and I don't always like that effect. What I've been using a lot recently is the Watercolors matte varnish, and the funny thing about this one is that it's not very matte. It's not that it's glossy, it's just that it doesn't seem to matte down your paint any more than it already was. If it was very matte, it might make it slightly more glossy, and if it was very glossy, it'll make it slightly less glossy. It sort of brings everything to sort of a neutral point, and mostly that's what I like, because the effects of a very flat coat tend to be that your colors will become a little muted. And in this case, I didn't really mind that. I was actually a little bothered by the overall richness of the color. It made it feel more snake-like to me than dragon-like. And so when I finally got the matte finish on, I was like, yeah, that's got it. That puts it right into my happy place. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go photograph this, and that way I can share that with you when this is all done. And if you have any questions or comments about the build, or paint actually, if you have questions about the build, then you should do it on the building video. If you have any questions about the paint, feel free to post them in the comments. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. So yeah, that's going to do it. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for watching any of the videos that you watch, but thank you for watching this one in particular, because this is the one you're watching right now. That's going to do it. I will talk to you all later. Bye-bye.